everyone, and welcome to today's Abacus Law edition of Free Training Thursday. I have here with me today Abacus trainer Ben Fu, who will be taking us through customizing intake forms. If you have any questions, please hold them until they will be answered at the end. Just please put them in the sidebar under questions. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Ben Fu, and he will jump right in.
Hello, thank you, Amanda, for that. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for attending. Today's class, again, customizing your intake forms. I will take you through the short presentations within 20 minutes or so, and then at the end, you can ask your questions and write them up in the panel in the sidebar, as Amanda mentioned. Okay, so just for a show of hands, I want to make sure that everyone is listening in. If you can click on your sidebar, there should be a little hand right next to your name. If you check on that, that means you guys can listen to me clearly. Perfect. I see a few hands come up. Thank you for that. Okay, so for today, we're going to talk about intake forms and how to customize them. Okay, one thing I want to make sure that I go over is that, some of you, depending on your practice areas, you might have purchased what we call our PALS, our Practice Area Legal Solutions. So in your intake icon, you might have already some of these intake forms specific to your practice areas of the PALS that you purchased, right? So civil litigation would have X amount of civil litigation intake forms. If you go into family law, you can see here the examples: adoption, custody, divorce, domestic, guardianship, paternity, right? Some of you might not have these specific PALs that I'm referring to, or intake forms for that matter. You will simply have what comes straight out of the box from Abacus, which is your regular new case, which is just two very simple examples. One where your client is going to be the plaintiff and the defendant. So for today's purposes, okay, I might use one maybe with family law just to show you how the intake form is and what can be customized in that. But you can literally take any intake form and make any customizations to those intake forms. Okay, so think about it that way, right? At any given point, you can take the original one and make it your own, and that one intake form can serve you for purposes of every single one of your cases that you create. Or if you're a firm that has multiple practice areas, you might want specific intake forms related to those specific practice areas. Okay, I know some clients might have family law, for example, as a practice area, so they have all of these that come if they purchase the PAL. So you don't want to reinvent the wheel when it comes to that, right? And then you can have Abacus immigration, let's say, as part of the PAL. Then you can then go straight to those specific forms for just immigration. Okay, so this is where you would have, and all your intake forms will reside. Where do you go do the actual customization for these intakes? You would go into File, Setup, and then you would go into Intake Form Manager. Under the Intake Form Manager, since I am obviously a trainer here, I will then have all of the intake forms that I have added to my list. So based on your firm, you would then have, if you purchase all the family law intake forms, then clearly you would have all of these already listed. Okay, some of you might just have a very small list when it comes to the Intake Form Manager. Regardless, this is where you can go in, take as an example any given one of the intake forms, and then you can then take a look or double click on it to see what makes up that intake form. Again, for purposes in this particular instance of, let's say, just to take a quick look at the intake form itself that you saw when you can access through the intake form. Through here, if you double click, let's say, on your divorce, you can then see the large version of that intake form come up. I like to bring this up when I am looking at the intake form, and for purposes of demonstration in this particular session, I want to have this right on the side here. Okay, I'm going to put it right there. And then right on top of this, I'm going to bring up again my File, Setup, Intake Form Manager, so that I can then walk you through what I am then viewing. So the intake form, I want to have this in the background so that I can make reference to what it exactly is that I can customize and whatnot. Okay, it disappeared on me again, so let's do that again. Oh, it's here in the background, sorry. So here's in the background. Now, I want to take that same one, which is my divorce one. Okay, now this time, if I want to do any edits to it, well, clearly, Okay, I'm then going to highlight it, and instead of double clicking on it, like this is what this gave me, now I'm going to have that same other window, and this time I'm going to go into edit. When I bring up my edit window, this is what we call the web and intake form designer. Okay, it's going to start you off with basically what the ultimate outcome would be, which is here. Okay, so we read carefully here. It says name of this form definition. This one is called exactly that, Abacus Family Law Divorce Case Intake Form. So this is the one that I have. Okay, if you were to create one and not use this as an example and you wanted to clone it, you can always do that as opposed to just taking a look at what we have in front of us, right? But this is where you would put the name of the actual intake, okay? Then you see title to appear at the top of the form. Like in this case, it says, please enter information about yourself and in your case, right? This is where you would enter anything that you want to appear at the very top of the case if you were to include it. Okay, in this case, we don't have that information. We simply doesn't have it, so it doesn't say anything at the top. It's empty. When this says there, it's because it's empty. You can also have this form to be an internal data entry, a web, or both. For this particular example demonstration, we're only going to use internal data entry. So that's what you would have clicked there, and then you want to proceed over into the record section. As I am now in the record section, you can then easily read for yourself that what this is referring to is saying identifying the records that you want for your intake form. These are usually a single case file, matter, which is this section, and a few contact names that will be linked to the matter using a link type that explains the relationship to the case, right? So that is really the gist of the intake form, is to have everything created under one form, under one session or one window, right? You're creating the matter, then all the names, and all the linking will be done for you. So here is where behind the scenes, so to speak, is where you can then come in into each section and either add fields, right? Like this is the first section here. See how I have highlighted my matters? If I then would go to edit properties, these are all the fields that make up all of these fields that are within my intake form. If I scroll down, if I go one by one, you'll be able to tell the first one at the top, client versus spouse. Okay, that's basically the text label that shows up right next to it. So if you wanted, instead of saying client versus spouse, you wanted to say something rather, I don't know, just change it up and say matter name or name of matter, you could have simply put that and edit that section by clicking on the edit field. This description that you says enter your last name versus your spouse, that literally is just if you hover over that section right now is not doing it, but if you hover over it, the whatever comes little description that comes up is going to be what you've entered in this section. It's not doing it because I have multiple windows open, but if you were in the form by itself, that is what would show up as in what you should be entering. So this is where you can have those guidelines set in place. Okay. To start you off at the top, you see how it says, please enter information about the case. Well, that's where you put whatever verbiage you want to show up right above in the, on top of the matter information, which is all of this. If I scroll down, you clearly would be able to see how it goes into the children, minor children. These are all going to be these check boxes. Some of these are going to be check boxes, right? Versus actual information that you're entering. So understanding the order on what this is, you simply can highlight what you want. You either move it up or move it down, and that's how it will be displayed within the intake form. Okay, so just keep those things in mind. See how this one, just keep those things in mind when you are trying to make any edits to all of this. Granted, I'm not going to go into very details of doing that. I just want to show you more or less some of our, highlights when it comes to the intake form that you can actually handle or take care. So I'm going to close out of this one really quick, and I'm going to move on to what else can you do besides editing the fields and the information that's within that to be displayed within your intake form. What else can you do? One that's very important to everyone is creating the linking of the names to the matters. So whatever information I'm entering within here in this section, right, automatically is going to create my link for my, it's going to create a link of my build to and as of a client. If it's in this divorce situation, I also wanted to create, let's say, a link of a petitioner, then I can easily just highlight the name, and I want to add the petitioner to it because it only has bill to or client that's being created. The minute that I enter the information, I can then go into edit properties. Okay, actually, sorry, yeah, you're going to go into edit properties, and you see here at the tops the link types that can be added easily. So I have build to, I have client, and then of course maybe I want also petitioner. Well, guess what? I can just, simple as that, come in here, add that whatever name I'm entering there, I'm adding it, not, it'll create a link not just as a build to, as a client, but also a petitioner. And as simple as that, I've added another link type that when I create my name, right, and I enter it in this section, all of those three links will be created when I create records, hit create records and close on my matter at the bottom. Okay, going on, that's the same concept. Then we can talk about events, right? And then there's the other names that are further down the line. Remember the events section? This is where you will be able to address or make edits as far as what rule can be embedded within any particular intake form. So if you have multiple practices or areas of practice, let's say you have family law, you have immigration, you have state planning, well, you might want to create, and I know this is a whole subject on in of itself is rules, but you can link one particular rule and have it go specific to each one of these intake forms. So obviously the rule that you might have within the intake process or the workflow for an immigration case is not going to be one the same for a divorce case or for a domestic violence case. Okay, so in here is where you can go in and actually change that rule that can then be embedded to the right intake form. So if I go to events, I then go, let's say, into edit properties. I don't know if you guys know, but the rules reside under the what codes. So you would have to go into the what code, okay? Then you would click edit field. And in the section where it says default value, this is where you would enter that rule. For the most part, out of the box, most of our rules are going to be new case related to say, the family law packages, right? The one for immigration might be new immigration, but you have the control over after you've created the rule and made a modification to the rule as how you want it, create your own. You can come in here and then put that name of the rule so that you can embed it within that specific intake form. So then you have one specific rule that applies to each one of those intake forms. And if you don't recall correctly what a rule is, the rule is a series of events that are related to one another within a timeline, okay? That can serve not only as workflow, but obviously as a rule for intake processes as well. So this is where you would put that name of the rule, and you would just literally type it up here, and then that new rule would then be customized as well. So the bottom line is that you can customize and control all of the fields, right, within any one of the sections. If I'm doing a matter, I can edit all of these fields and add more if I wanted to, right? Other fields in there. You can also customize the linking behind the scenes of whenever you put a name within the intake form, how you want all of those, that name particularly you're putting in there, how it should be linked to the matter. And then last but not least, of course, you can then customize the rule that you want to be attached to any given intake form. So along the same lines, again, you can always edit this section that comes up on any given name, right? If we go into the name itself and edit properties, you'll notice here it says, please enter contact information for the client, okay? And you could have changed that verbiage if you wanted to and make it easier on your staff as opposed to what you should be entering, right? And that same concept follows along to your spouse here. This section, please contact information for the opposing part of your spouse. You know, you can be, again, you can have that verbiage at the header at the top of that record change as well. So the same concept applies as to you seeing, okay, well, I've added now a client, right? A spouse link, an opposing counsel. And let's say that you wanted to add to this mix, you wanted to add, I don't know, a judge as the name. you can add another name section to the mix if you wanted to. So right now it says it only has 3 names. This one, the obviously the one for the spouse, and one another one below that for the opposing counsel. Okay, but if you wanted to, let's say, clone any one of these records and add it to the mix, or you can simply hit add record. You can then say, what am I adding as a record? Am I adding a name? Am I adding an event? Am I adding a matter? Okay, so if you click on add a name, you see how it comes empty here, the name, say, see, it allows me to then enter whatever header I want. Please enter name of the judge, right? And after I enter the name of the judge, how do I want to link it? Of course, as a judge. So you would literally start creating the other name section that you want to add to your form already. Okay, so the end of the day, you can add, as you can obviously have one matter, multiple name records that you want to add. Okay, you can link, obviously control what's being linked, and then of course all the fields that you can then add by simply adding fields here that can translate over into some of these. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to cover is obviously after you're done with all of that at any given point, you can go to the next, and then you would save, and then you would finish. And that's how that can then be created. Now, of course, I mentioned to you at the very beginning that you would want to clone it as opposed to, right, using the ones that were there. So you would highlight, let's say you like the one for divorce, but you should make it your own if you're going to make any modifications to it. So instead of hitting edit, you would hit clone. And when you hit clone, you're creating a new intake form. We recommend you create your own because if we ever have updates or upgrades, okay, within our intakes, within our PALs, it overrides the original that we had in place. And if you made edits to the original, as opposed to cloning it and then making edits to it, then you would lose everything you had. So if you like, let's say, this one in particular, and you want to make just a few changes, we recommend that you highlight, and instead of hitting edit, that you clone it, call it whatever name you would prefer, and start work. And then when you start doing all the edits, it'll be in the clone version. So let's say it's just here. In my case, the new name would be Fu New Case, right? I would hit done. And now you see how I'm working off of my new intake that I want to work on. Okay, so then I want to get records. Any changes I make here would apply to my intake that I created as opposed to the original, like I mentioned before. Okay, now that is pretty much what I had for you guys today. I know it's a little bit, there's a lot more detail that can go into it, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what you can do. And if you get stuck on any part of the process, I do want to make sure that you are aware that we have, if you were to type up under your help section, okay, so let me just show you really quick. If you were to go into your help here and you go to contents, okay, when you go to content section, you have the ability to then say, all right, intake form manager. And as you type that up, then you're able to see what can come through as your search. And when you come into your search, then in great detail here, you can have more options showcased for you. Oh, loading matters intake forms with existing form. The intake form manager, creating intake forms, right? Templates, managing intake forms. You have web and intake form designs. You have all sorts of these topics that can then talk about in every very little in every detail as possible. What is each one of these tabs with screenshots, and you're able to then edit, go into details, and just so you're familiar, this exists, and this will aid you in that process or assist you in that process. Okay. So again, remember, you can type up intake form manager or web and intake forms, uploading your forms, designing your intake forms for an extra database. You get the idea. All the information can be here that can then assist you to maybe conclude or get to where you want within your cases. So So I have a question that starts. It says, under the Start tab, what is the difference between a web and an internal data entry? Basically, the question is with regards to this first page, which actually I'm going to show it right here because this is what I grabbed. So in here, it'll tell you, that the web page, this will be where if you create a form, an intake form for your web page, as opposed to internal would only be within the application of Abacus. If you want that to translate from the web page that you have and also be an internal one, that's why it says that the option is both. Okay. If you have more questions, please type them up. And as I get them, I will read them out loud and then see if we can answer your questions for you right away. Is the intake form available on a mobile device? No. You don't have access to that unless, of course, you're working off of your tablet and then you are accessing, let's say, your APC environment, and basically you're just accessing your own workstation. Then yeah, through that measures, yes, but not as an actual part of the mobile device. So then the question is, once you complete an intake form, how do you access it? Again, once the intake form has been created, you can then go into your intake, right? And then you'll be able to see it here. Like I just created food new case and even completed it. It's right here under my intake forms. It'll be right there as the one that I just created, and you can have access to it. And of course, you can always delete these, right? You have control over deleting them I just created that one, and per se, I just didn't want that. I can go back to my setup, right? By mistake, I go intake form manager. I'm going to highlight that one that is obviously I didn't intend to. I mean, I intended to create, but I didn't really finish it. I can highlight, simply hit delete, and it says, "Are you sure you want to permanently delete the intake form?" I'm going to say yes to that, and just like that, it removes it from the list. The other question is, can you start out with a blank intake form rather than cloning one of the general ones included? The answer is yes. Again, here you have all the intake form managers that already exist. If you wanted to start your own from scratch, you can hit add and then says from scratch. Then the other next question is, how do you view a completed intake form for a specific client? Well, if the form has been completed, you simply go back to your matters browse, whatever the case is that you filled out already. You can then double click on the actual case or matter, and then there you'll be able to see your matters show up. Another question, can I print the intake form whether filled out or empty? The answer is that if you go to your intake form here, you can print it out only if it's empty. After you filled it out, you cannot print it. So once you go into, let's say, your family one here, divorce case, you see how it says print? You can print it out prior to being filled out. Because once you filled out, you cannot hit or actually you can start filling it out, but right before you hit create records and close, then you hit print and it'll print out the information for you. Excellent questions, by the way. Let's keep it rolling, trying to answer as many as I can as they come through. So how do I edit the intake form of a previous matter? If you are referring to a matter that's already created, okay, and you use a particular intake form before, that information has already been passed on to the matter screens. So therefore, the only place where you can edit any of that information will be within the matter screens. So all the editing can be done here. Okay, and then simply make any changes you like. For example, if it was Carl Anthony Towns and I don't know, you were supposed to put a hyphen as opposed to, sorry, let's just make this one. If you wanted to put Rojas, I don't know, Rojas, and then you want to add Lopez, right? Then you can just add it just like that on the name section, and then you can hit save, and then it'll save it as Cox versus Rojas Lopez going forward. So if I go back in there and I pulled out that one, now it's Cox versus Rojas Lopez. So the edit can be done on the matter screens and the name screens after you've created everything from the intake form. Can I move the fields around in the intake form? Yes, we talked about that before. So going back to my setup, intake form manager. Let's say again another one, just the divorce intake. If I go to edit per se, and I go to records, if I simply want the fields right within my spouse, I'm gonna edit property. See how if I wanted, I don't know, this class one, go down the line, right? My social security to appear before my email address, then you can just move this up, highlight, move up, and then hit done. And just like that, you can then arrange whatever order you want the fields to move on. That's why you have move up, move down. Obviously, this is the last one. That's why it's only giving me the option to move up. If I go to email address, I can move that one down, right? You get the idea. How are additional, no, that's the question is, and the next question is, how are additional link type or codes added? Or is this not necessary beyond the built-in types and codes? Well, that's entirely up to you. You can actually have, the built-in ones are should be sufficient enough for you to choose from. Okay, so what I mean by that, if when you're creating a divorce case in our situation right now, it's only recreating a link type, let's say in a divorce for the client. And you want your client not only to be linked as a client, as a bill to, but also as a petitioner, as I just mentioned. Well, if that's the case, you simply just have to highlight the names, hit the edit properties, see what's available already in the link types here. Okay, these are all the link types that I might have as an option. Remember, with the pals that you purchase, you have X amount of attached types that already come with those practice areas. In other words, for divorce, obviously the petitioner comes along and you don't have to create them. But at any given point, if you feel like creating a link yourself that you then want to add to so that you can then see how it's been linked to the case or matter, you can always add them here where it says add. Well, not actually not here, but I'll show you somewhere else. You can, and then after it's listed here, you can choose from it. Okay. But your link types, by the way, you can create or modify it, I should say, from your link names tab, and where it says add link. Let's say I pick any given name. In this section of the link types, this is where you can add those link types that are new, the attached types that you want. Okay. Um, Obviously, again, if you wanted to go say new petitioner, okay, then you can hit done. I would then type in here, besides obviously the petitioner that it is that's already in place, you wanted to create one called new petitioner. You can then hit done, and then just like that, it added one to the mix. Now, when I go back to my options as to if I can link something else as a new petitioner, this will then be available under that list within my internal um, within my intake form manager as an option. But I guess again, it's up to you. Most folks that have the pals already purchased, along with um, you know uh, we've covered for pretty much all the types and the codes that you can use, but you can always create your own if you want to. Okay. By the way, you can always delete these if you create them and you don't want them anymore. You can always just go back into your attach type here, hit delete. Are you sure you want to delete it? And just like that, you got rid of it. So that's not going to exist anymore. All right. Let's see if any more questions come through. If they don't come through in about a minute or so, that would be everything for today.